Half-Life, Valve's breakout title from 1998, a game set to change the first-person shooter genre entirely, for better or for worse. Before Half-Life was the reign of id Software with the Doom and Quake franchises. Both of them were commercial and critical successes with one major thing in common. Fast-paced, action-heavy gameplay with little to no care for story, and what story was there was merely an excuse to shoot things. With that, it's time to take a retrospective on Half-Life and see whether it's overrated, underrated, or fairly rated. To clarify, I was playing the Steam version and not the absolute original release, so in the video you're seeing the updated textures of the Steam version and not the original textures. But I have seen the original textures and to be honest they look pretty great for 1998, though the faces look like they recently got hit with a frying pan covered in beige paint. On the other hand, in the Steam version, the faces actually look pretty damn good. Almost as good as those in Half-Life 2, but just a little bit less detailed. On the story front, Half-Life isn't as impressive as some modern games, including Half-Life 2, but for the 1990s it was pretty spectacular. Oh, and by the way, spoilers ahead, so spoiler alert, spoiler alert, warning, warning, spoiler alert. Okay, with the spoiler warning out of the way, we can actually talk about the story. The story revolves around Gordon Freeman, a scientist working at a science facility called Black Mesa. I'd be surprised if he didn't work at a science facility, to be honest. At the start of the game, shit goes extremely sideways, with you in the middle of said shit as it goes sideways. Though thanks to your HEV suit, you survive with only a couple of scratches, a light dashing of severe plasma burns, and a small planet of aliens to fight off, using whatever weaponry you can scrap together in a scientific facility. The weapons mostly consist of crowbars and guns so generic Call of Duty took them to court for ripping off its genericness. After that, you fight your way through the facility, fighting aliens, waiting for the military to rescue you when the military isn't there to save you, but instead to shoot you, or more correctly, get shot by you. After your first soldier encounter, they become another standard enemy type, which also happen to fight the other aliens for you sometimes. Which means you might be better off bringing popcorn than grenades alongside your pocket gun rack. After this, you fight your way through the rest of the facility and eventually reach the Lambda core. After fucking around with the core and some portals, you eventually get to go to an entire another dimension, which you trek through until the final boss, which you kill before talking to the G-Man and the game ends. Skipping to the gameplay, ooh boy, this is going to be a long one. Well, let's start with the guns. The guns of Half-Life are actually quite good as a whole. The best of them are noisy, they feel good to use, and they kill effectively. The worst, on the other hand, namely the two you're going to be using the most, the shotgun and machine gun, are hard to hit with, and generally seem to waste more ammo than a drunk hippopotamus using a machine gun that's hot glued to its bollocks to attempt to shoot down a fighter jet that's flying around Pluto. Even though the primary fire of the machine gun and shotgun seem to fire extra low velocity confetti outside of bayonet range, the secondary fire of both are actually pretty damn powerful. The shotgun's secondary fire, which is by far the least interesting of the two, is a double shot, killing most common enemies in one hit if you poke them in the face with it. The machine gun's, on the other hand, is an underslung grenade launcher, which although it doesn't have much ammo, is actually quite powerful when it's loaded. Though the grenades travel at about the same speed as your average continent, so don't expect them to hit much outside of point-blank range without arcing it and waiting a short lifetime. Like Half-Life 2, the original Half-Life uses a pick-up health system, with supply caches dotted around the map like power pellets in a Pac-Man game. One minute you're Johnny No Health, the next minute you're bloody Iron Man and can absorb just about any attack the game has to throw at you and dish twice as much back without any issue. Well, that is until you reach the later sections of the game where the enemies kill you faster than getting tactically nuked one too many times killed my life goal of being a professional gamer. This means that every supply bin is less of a signal that it's time to fuck shit up, and more of a signal that you can exist in the vicinity of an enemy for more than half a nanosecond without dying. Speaking of dying like a bad trend, that's one thing I found myself doing quite a lot at certain sections, which if my dysfunctional brain calculated correctly is due to a bit of bad map design and just outright nasty enemy placement. My favourite example of this being that one section where you get to fire a tank cannon to open a door and then fight off some enemies with a turret, which is all well and good until you have to walk through the door with whatever health you have left after that section, without getting any medkits mind you, into a corridor where you're surrounded by some of the game's more challenging enemies. The difficulty isn't even a nice curve. It's the kind of spike we see most commonly used in date rape. Seriously, the difficulty goes from 0 to hero in about the time it takes to scream out in anger at the 40 deaths you've just racked up on that one bullshit choke point. Not to mention the fact that the ammo for the good weapons is found in the same quantity as I have spare cash. Almost fucking none. Worse than that is the fact that even when you do come across a large cache of rare ammo, Gordon Freeman can carry just about as much ammo as you could fit in the average jar of pickles, except that all the pickles are still in there with the ammo, which probably explains why it's rather inaccurate. Thankfully, the enemy variety is actually quite palatable, since there are quite a lot of different types of enemies with lots of different looks and very differing attack styles, although almost all of them are completely bullshit. The most standard enemies are the hit-scan wielding humans, which kill you fast enough to make insta-kills look slow. Besides them, you've got many varieties of alien, from cute little cyclops dogs that have area of effect attacks, to squid-faced things that spit out shotgun blasts of acid, among quite a few others. Though, like most budget shooters, Half-Life has enough bullshit to fertilize the entire United States of America twice over. This bullshit includes dying faster than a popular meme template, enemies with undodgeable attacks, homing machine guns, enemies with enough health to tank anything but your strongest of arms, and trying to do intricate parkour around the levels while you feel like you're walking on butter. The worst offender for being a higher percentage of bullshit than the average political campaign is the final boss, and that's mostly because it combines some of the worst elements of Half-Life with things that just outright shouldn't be in gaming. For one, you've got to use at least some level of parkour literacy no matter which way you spin it, which is bloody difficult since this game's engine, which if I know correctly is a very early version of the Source engine, is nowhere near as crisp as it should be for this kind of parkour, and nowhere near as crisp as the likes of any modern engine ever, making parkouring in this feel like trying to grapple onto ice with your fucking teeth. Then there's the fact it has an undodgeable homing attack, which wouldn't be so bad if it didn't teleport you into another fucking dimension, which you'd then have to parkour your way out of. Worst of all is its main attack, which is a sort of energy ball blast thing, which hurt like hell, and have a hitbox bigger than my ego! The final boss also does just about as good of a job at signaling how you're supposed to kill it as I do at making successful YouTube videos. Fucking terribly! As much as I hate to say it, this game is the first one I've reviewed to force me to swallow my pride and look up a walkthrough, for multiple sections no less than. Half-Life also has quite a few sort of puzzles, which amount to things you have to find an alternate way around. Thankfully, unlike your average shooter, Half-Life has a pseudo-open world, making it feel like you're actually finding a path around it and not just being shown one. Another good element I have to give credit for is the implementation of friendly AI scientists and guards, who are all willing to help you out of a jam. The guards especially make good shields against the occasional battalion of enemies, not to mention the fact they're actually able to kill headcrabs fairly effectively, making them a good form of pest control. On the topic of giving credit where it's due, I have to commend Half-Life for the fact there isn't a single weapon that becomes completely useless. Even the starting pistol is good as a long-range weapon towards the end of the game, although you won't use it that often. Though, for any credit the usefulness does earn, I will deduct double, because towards the end of the game I was forced to rely on the auto-aim system just to beat out the enemy's aimbot, which although a minor gripe, does poke me in the ego just a little bit too hard for comfort. I don't think I've done a glitches section in a while, but Half-Life has plenty to talk about. From getting stuck on things, to firing a rocket launcher remotely near a wall while looking away from said wall and having it blow up behind you, to grenades that bounce off of thin air sometimes, Half-Life can be extremely glitchy sometimes. As much as I'd like to say I've dealt with worse, I really haven't, at least not for any of these reviews. Half-Life 2 especially was polished enough that it could blind you if you shone a light remotely near it, while the original is rougher than a cat's tongue. Though, as is usual with Retrospective, it's time to look to the past. Half-Life got a lot of review scores of 9.5 out of 10 and even higher, and barely anything below that. I can't say if this is because of a difference between the Steam version and the original release, or just rose-tinted glasses, but Half-Life is nowhere near a 9.5 out of 10. Personally, I couldn't rate Half-Life more than a 2 out of 10 based on 2019 standards, but Retrospective isn't about rating games on 2019 standards, it's about rating games on their original standards. So what about 1998 standards? By 1998 standards, Half-Life is fairly crisp, has decent weapons, controls fairly well, and hell, it even supports widescreen resolutions including higher than 1080p. Although that doesn't really work that well because above 900p the HUD is basically useless. Though Half-Life suffers horrifically in one area games like Doom don't. It feels extremely unfair. Doom has unfair demon design, but counters that out by making the player Death Incarnate. In Half-Life, you're not Death Incarnate. You're a beefed-up Joe Schmo with a hazard suit. On the other hand, Half-Life does introduce a fairly in-depth story for 1998, and even goes so far as to have two endings. Overall, by 1998 standards, I would have to put Half-Life at a solid but not exceptional 8 out of 10, therefore making Half-Life the first overrated game on Retrospective, although not by much. Personally, I wouldn't say Half-Life is worth the money on its own. If you get it in something like the Valve bundle for next to nothing, sure it's worth a play on a lower difficulty. But $10 is too high of a price for a game that's over 2 decades old that doesn't really stand up to the timeless classics being released around it. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and bash that bell icon with your crowbar to see more from me. I have been your host, Vert343, signing off. Peace out, gentlemen.